We are going to get started. So, one, obviously, want to thank Tommy Evans for joining our podcast. Tommy's been an awesome originator for Arbor. I think you joined Arbor back in, was it 2019? So anyways, thank you so much for giving us a little bit of your time today. Tom and I had a chance to talk a little bit before this and kind of map out some items for you. But I mean, always just to get started, man, can you lead us off with a little bit of your background, how long you've been in the business, how you got started, maybe how you got to Arbor, et cetera?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, thanks for having me. Arbor Nation, what's happening? So I have an engineering background by schooling, OSU, go Beavs. So my background was really taking things from an analytical standpoint. When I first got into the mortgage industry was 2002, actually. Ditech.com. So I randomly ran into some woman, Diane Gunnarsson, who loved my energy. She's like, "Oh my God, I want you to come work with me." And I walked into the office and I saw like cubicles everywhere. At the time, the place was located over in South Coast Plaza area. And there was just sea of people answering phones on the phones. And, there's a guy on a bullhorn, like yelling at people to log in. There's 70 people in the queue, log in. And so this was my first introduction to mortgage. I knew zero about a loan. And so, I basically went from 0 to 14 months later. I was averaging 60 loans a month that I was closing. I closed, I think, 140 million in my very first year in the industry, knowing not one thing about it. But I was a glutton for, work, and so like we were getting paid maximum of $400 per file if you closed 60 or more files per month. And so the goal was to close 60 a month so that you hit your $400 a month. And so we were out there like shifting, loans from LO to LO, like, hey, I'm at 59, give me one, put it in my name, playing games like that. So you're always trying to like stay right at 60. And so yeah, I mean, I was managing a 200 plus pipeline right out of the gates, and working like 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, and literally hit a brick wall. And I'm like, this is insane. So next company that I worked with was Lennox Financial, and also call center, radio advertisements, biggest no-brainer in history of mankind. Right. But he was a broker. And actually a very similar model because you could either broker or correspondent. And so almost identical, other than they made the phones ring. And so I went from making $400 a loan to eye-opening, like, hey, 3 on the back, like one up front, closing costs all included. So you went from, sometimes you make $30,000-$40,000 on a file from $400. Yeah. And that was, I loved that model. I mean, it was one of my favorite places I worked, and had a great time. And, it was back when like the place was so small that the phone would ring and the first person to answer the phone was the one that got the call. Oh. And so I would like learned, don't pick up the phone, just sit there answering, pushing the answer button, and all of a sudden somebody on the phone, I'm like, oh, hey, and so that's, how I was able to succeed with that company was, just kind of outsmarting and figuring out, how to get the phone, before somebody else. Yeah. And so work ethic's always been something that, has been, I'm not afraid to work. Like I will work as much as it requires, and my whole, the phone system would go down. They had to reboot every whole goal. Like every day was to, even when I was at Ditech, for example, thing at like 9 p.m. and I would sit there and I was stacking files and putting them together while I was, waiting for the phone system to come back up. Yeah. And at the time they had internet leaks. Everybody would leave. I would sit there until, 1 a.m. and all of a sudden internet leads popped up. And I was like getting like 60 internet leads. I just sit there and take every single one
Yeah.
and respond to every one of them. And that like was one of the ways that I kind of, figured out the system. Fast forward to 2008, and I exited the market, went into a asset management company, and that was really helpful. From understanding, what happens on the other side. Buying the loan. How do we get rid of this asset that's not performing? So we were doing cash for keys. We were foreclosing on people. Unfortunately, we were trying to get these loans working, and having them actually make their payment again. And so it was a really great way of understanding the back end of the industry, but also we had to go and analyze every single property. So it taught me like how to look at comps, how to figure out what a property was worth. We had like, we'd call up realtors and be like, hey, look, what are we dealing with at this property? Like, at the time, you'd have properties all over the nation that were getting, like, we get pools of like 6,000 at a time.
Yeah.
And you had to go through and figure out like, all right, well, what are we dealing with? Like, is there a homeless person living in there? Like, is it a total?
And this is like what, like 2000?
That was like 2009 through like 11, 12, right through there.
And then at 12, you go, when do you break into like the referral based loan officer?
So 12, the moratorium happened on foreclosures. So that market dried up. And at that point, I'm like, I gotta make a change. So that's when I'm like, I started to talk to some of my friends in the mortgage industry again. And I'm like, all right, I gotta do purchase business. Like, this is when I was like, I don't know anything about it. Like, you guys would laugh. Like, I would literally, like, when I was at Ditech, I would hang up on somebody that wanted to buy a home. Like, I was refi only for, the first 7 years of my career.
Yeah.
And like, I literally did not want to talk to them, which is horrible and awful and amazing.
Did any of your, did on your first stints of your career in that refi cycle prior to going into like asset management, do you still have clients from those days that hung on, or did that all go away when you?
Very limited.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I did not manage that database at all. Like,
cool.
Ditech, zero. Like, that was all Ditech's. Like, they did not let you take anything out of there at all. Lennox, they would have totally allowed it. It's just, I didn't have a database management, because really it was just who was in my cell phone that I kept in touch with.
Got it. So now it's 2012
and
you're,
and I got contacted. Actually, I was at a wedding with Dan Hansen. Dan, yeah. So he was at iMortgage at the time. He goes, "Hey, Tommy, like, come do purchase loans." Like, I was like, "I don't know how." He's like, "We'll teach you." So came to iMortgage. Ryan Grant was there, and he goes, I asked Ryan, I was like, I saw what he was doing, and he was crushing it, and he was doing like 120 million. And I was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Can I follow you around one day?" So I literally tailed him. So this was like on a Wednesday. He drove down to San Clemente, went to the broker preview. He had open houses, driving around to all these different open houses, dropping off flyers, goes to the Irvine broker preview, goes around dropping off flyers. He must have ran at least 7 stop signs. He breaking through red lights, speeding. Like, he was an absolute maniac, and he was everywhere. And so I'm like watching him. It's like everybody'd walk in, like, dude, he worked the room. He talked to every single, shaking hands, and he would go to every single event. Everybody knew who Ryan was. And so that's when I was like, okay, this is what it takes. Like, I need to go to all the broker previews. I need to, and so I was driving up to, like, Huntington Beach, all the way down to San Clemente, and everything, from Wednesday to Friday, open houses on the weekends, doing all the same things. I'd hit 6 to 10 open houses. I'd hit open houses that were just random. I'd just pop in and, see who was there. And so that's how I established, the referral business that I have today, was putting in the time, putting in the hours, and, doing the hard things that a lot of people weren't doing at the time. And that's what's keeping me going right now. And so, fast forward, I mortgage, got bought out by Loan Depot, and 2018, 19, I'm like just getting killed on pricing and losing deals left and right. I'm asking for pricing exceptions on everything because everybody's shopping out there. And I had a friend that was a broker, and he was just like telling me his pricing. I was like, this is can't be right. And he's closing on time. Like, we're trained as retail that one, a broker has no control. You don't get to like choose who your underwriter. You don't get to talk to an underwriter. You don't get to, have any control over your appraisals. Like, all this stuff that I was like, they can't close on time. So I'm out there selling this, right? And then meanwhile, my friend's like, no, it's not. That's not how it works. And that's in funny enough, like I remember in 2008, you were telling me you're going to start this business, and I laughed. I'm like, are you crazy? Like, in this market? I'll never forget that. Like, you were at Chad Walton's house, and we were having this conversation, and anyhow, so
here you are. So now you're at Arbor, and we were talking before when we got started here. I think we've done a number of these. This is our 6th podcast, right? So. And Tommy's he's a podcast fan. He's watched them all. And one of the things he mentioned, right, that he wanted to focus on today was like something different, right? Because we've talked about a lot of topics from our previous top originators, and it was kind of like I think Tommy wanted to bring to the table some ideas and some thoughts that loan officers could use today that we haven't necessarily talked about in previous podcasts. So can you kind of walk us through maybe? What's working for you today, and kind of, I think you've had some recent success stories and some big months. So, like we talked about, I think there are some loan officers, a lot of loan officers that are there stuck in kind of that maybe, 0, 1, 2 loan a month category, and they're just trying to figure out how to get over the hump in this market. Can you maybe kind of walk us through what you're doing now that's working? And
yeah, and I'd say like the number one thing that's been, really great for me right now is that $25,000 grant program with First Citizens, now $15,000. And yes, at the beginning of the year, it was painful. Like, literally, like I was about to lose relationships. I had, realtors calling me like, hey, this thing's, not closing, and we're at 45 days, and now we're spilling into, 50 days. It was hard, but setting the proper expectations up front. I told everyone, like, hey, can we close in 30 days? I was like, absolutely not. It's not going to happen. Like, we need a 45-day close of escrow. And then you got to remind them, like, hey, like, and just so you guys know, like, their upfront process sucks. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, you can't send out, you can't do anything on the file until disclosures go out. So instead of waiting, so these are kind of little tricks. Instead of waiting for the actual fees to come in, just over disclose. Send it out like day one as soon as you can. Like, have your processor just get it disclosed without the actual fees. Like, that's tip number one. Then, and only then, can you order the appraisal. And so a lot of the times we were sitting there waiting for escrow to get us the actual fees so we could disclose correctly. And that was mistake number one, because now you might be 5 days in and you haven't even ordered the appraisal. And then their appraisal process also is a pain in the ass, because they take a 3-day review process at the end. It's gotten better. But at the time, the appraisal would come back, and they wouldn't even tell you like what's going on with the appraisal. Like, if it's in, they won't give you value. And so you're like, hey, I see the appraisal, I talked to the appraiser, he's done, he uploaded it. Like, where is it? It might take you 4 to 5 days for them to actually like upload it where you get it. And so that was really tough, because it took like 22 days on one of my loans to actually get the appraisal back. And so you're at like a 15-day contingency for your appraisal. So that's tough. Like, there's no getting around that other than just being like, I'm sorry, and we're getting $25,000, so like, we're not going to ask you for a credit. Like, yay. But I had to, bang my head into the wall. Fast forward, like, I just, like, last month, I did 21-day closes on 3 of them. And so,
really,
so it can be done, and so it's just, it's not that I'm out there promoting doing 21-day close, absolutely not. But I've got agents that are like, look, back in like February, March, they're like, we're not going to get this offer accepted with a 45-day close.
So in terms of though, like actually going out there, so it's let's just go back and it's middle of let's say it's August of 2022, right? And we're just starting to ramp up that program. Like, how have you been able to like? What's the process in actually pushing that out as a niche and hooking that, like building those relationships around that product?
Yeah. So, if you guys don't know this already, there is a flyer that marketing created, and so right now it's called the $15,000, grant or whatever closing cost credit. So I was out there picking up the phone, calling my agents, and saying, "Hey, I've got this unbelievable program. It's free money. It's a grant. If eligible properties, and so this works really good, especially in North Orange County, Riverside, LA. Like, so there's certain pockets that are better than others. Stay away from Norco. But calling up the agents and forwarding them really, I recorded a video like, hey, here's how you look it up. Here's the program, and forwarding that out to all of your agents. Picking up the phone, having that conversation with them. And my best agents were out there promoting it at their open houses. So I would tell them which properties qualify for it. And they're out there picking up new buyers because they need leads too, right?
Yeah.
And so they're picking up new buyers. They're literally telling every single person that walks in that open house about this program. Those are the agents, and that's what you need to tell your agents that they need to do. I had other agents that were representing buyers. They would call me up and say, hey, I need to get my client this program. They're already with my preferred lender, but I want them to send, I'm sending them to you so they can get this product. And so I've picked up new agents, not just from open houses. My top agents are referring me to other agents, and that's created.
So because the product is there, right, then not only does your realtor that has the listing, right, is leveraging the product to bring and attract more people in there that potentially are going to leverage that product. But then what you're saying is that then buyers agents are going and showing it. You have the flyers that are in that open house, and then those agents that are coming in through that open house are like, oh, this qualifies for that. And now you're basically stealing away pre-approved clients from other lenders because they don't have access to it. And those realtors are now referring you their people so they can have access to the product.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And so what everyone needs to understand right now is that real estate agents are, they're scared. Like volume is down. I was telling Ryan earlier, like I was just looking up some of the top agents and their volume is way down, especially buyer volume. And so they have these buyers that are pre-approved and rates just keep going up, and they need something to talk to them about that, like they're buyers, so they don't lose them, and to keep things moving in the right direction. So we need to be like the hope that they need, and to bring something good to the table that is going to give them the motivation to be out there talking to more people and being excited. And people want to work with people that are doing good things and are excited about, and fun to talk to. Like they don't want to be like, oh yeah, rates went up to 7.5%. Like,
right.
And that's really all they have to talk about right now. It's like,
well, that's the thing, right? So I think people are, I think everybody's scared, right? I mean, whether I don't know if scared might be the right word. I think there's a frustration. There's like this, even like apathy towards like just getting up and trying to find the positivity in the industry, right? I mean, we're coming up on the 2-year mark here in November, that's when kind of we started this down cycle and everything started changing. But I think I've said this maybe in a previous podcast, but we can control the narrative and we can bring the positivity. And at the end of the day, there are still people that are transacting, and whether they're transacting and first, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, I mean, you can remember back in the last cycle, I mean, first towards the tail end, first-time home buyers had no chance, right? And here we are leveraging all of these DPA programs, the First Citizens Grant Program, et cetera. That's like the hot ticket right now. And really first-time home buyers have a tremendous opportunity. So that's where the conversation needs to be. Whereas like everybody who was in the industry, realtors, lenders, everybody was just feeding on the low rate, wagon. it's really up to us to bring that positivity to bring and have those conversations, because it's only on the positivity of our conversation with that realtor that they're then going to transmit and have the ammunition to go have a positive conversation themselves in their spheres of influence and be able to talk about that product and ultimately build the whole business cycle. But so Tommy, so that's the realtor side of how you're building on like the DPA stuff. And then I know we were talking about, jumbo's always been a tough thing in our lane. And I know that a lot of loan officers in Orange County locally, we come in and out and try and focusing on jumbo. So can you walk us through kind of like what your approach is on the jumbo side of the fence?
Yeah, and so I might not be the best person to ask about this, but I'm just going to be honest. I have, friends at pretty much each bank, PNC, Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, Citibank, you name it. And so I think that's a resource, and I'm going to give you an example of exactly what just happened. But it's a resource that you need to tap into. If you don't have friends at the banks, find one. Because there's a bunch of loans that we can do that they can't, and vice versa. Like we're not competitive on jumbo pricing. What we're good at is the things that they can't do. And so knowing that, do your research. Like find realtors that are working with bank people and go out and target those specifically. And hey, I see that you're working with so and so from Wells Fargo. He does an amazing job, and I know they're really good at this, but here's what I'm good at, right? And those are the conversations you need to be having. But to answer your question, I go out there and I quote bank rates. I don't quote our rates, quite frankly. I don't. And so if and when they do get into escrow, a lot of times I'm just straight up referring it over to that other, loan officer, because we're not.
So you're going, yeah. So you're basically saying, I'm going to drop this loan off on and you're basically working a trade.
That's right.
And okay. And so what would you say just is like a realistic like expectation? So if you're building a relationship with like a bank loan officer on the referral side, how many outflows, like when you give a jumbo, what would you say? Are you getting more, you're giving less? Like how much of your business actually comes from like bank loan officer referrals?
I mean, from a volume standpoint, if you're talking about actual, they're making out because, right, you're talking about jumbo loans,
sure,
right? So, you're talking, but as far as an income standpoint, I was going to make zero on that, right?
Yeah.
And so by me pushing it over there, now anything that I get in return from him is gravy,
yeah,
right? And so it's almost like a 2 or 3 to 1 that I would say, like,
okay,
I'm giving 1 and I'm probably getting 2 or 3 back. At less volume. But
yeah.
Let me give you a perfect example of what just happened. So I had a deal that this bank had a preferred realtor. She had a deal going sideways. He's like, call Tommy. I talked to the agent on the buyer side. So this buyer's agent then says, hey, can you do this deal? I was like, yeah, like I can make this work, whether it was I forget exactly what the situation was, but it's like either a stated, no ratio loan.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like, yes, let's do this. So you save the deal there. Meanwhile, she has another client that's a VA buyer, gets declined by not only one, Navy Fed, or I forget who, I think it was Navy Fed, was denying it. She also had her preferred lender also said he couldn't get the deal done. She's like, can you take a look at this and see if there's anything you do? And so I took a look at it and I'm like, they were like supposed to close like the next week.
Yeah.
And this was like a Monday. And so I was like, have them do the application. Like, we got to move quick. Like, let's see what we can do here. So I took a look at it. One, I use exact tax rate. So if you guys don't know how to look up tax rate, like look it up. That was the difference. Like a lot of these people will use like 1.25 default. What if it's at 1.05? Now, if there's Melrose, I want to use a 1.25. I don't want to use that 1.8. So knowing that is really important. 2, this guy was getting disability income through veterans. Like, so you can gross that up. And so all of a sudden, and 3, we got better rates. So like all of a sudden I'm getting a approval, and I had literally they submitted the loan on a Monday. I sent this one to UWM. I had CTC on Tuesday, CDL on Tuesday, docs ready to go out on Thursday, I think it was, and we could have funded as early as that Friday if it wasn't for Trip.
Wow.
And now she's sending me every single one of her clients, and she's one of the number one agents in Temecula. Like, you can't
That's
make this
awesome.
stuff up.
Right.
And like, I've got like 3 in process with her right now, and this was just 2 months ago that this happened.
So like, and you know, I mean, that is kind of, you know, I mean, those are the stories, right? And I love the fact that it's like, because you have like the better rate, but also the devil's in the details. And I know we've had other folks on these podcasts, right, where it's like, you know, they've, you cannot put a price on the experience and actually knowing the details and how to structure deals, right? Just being able to gross up income and do those little things like that to shave down the back end ratio. And that's how you're going to win the business. I wanted to kind of go into maybe a little bit into like your day to day, right? So, you know, how are you? So that's like a win that you're pivoting on, you're winning with that realtor. That's a huge win. Like, are there like day to day wins? Like, I'm just curious, like in like the work life of like Tommy Evans, like, so you wake up, it's like Monday, Tuesday, like, are you segmenting your routine? Do you just constantly, are you constantly calling a set number of realtors? Like, do you have like that system, or what are you kind of like flowing? Like, how are you staying busy and kind of?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's I mean, very similar to everybody else. Like, that's you know, doing things here. You know, you gotta have a system in place, and so you know, like I was trained through the core, right? So same deal. You know, pick up the phone, make your calls. I'd say, like, you know, I have probably the best thing that I can do is be on the phone. Like, that's like my superpower, I guess. You know, like, the most, I guess, common feedback that I get is that I make people feel comfortable on the phone, and quite frankly, that's because I don't BS people out there. Like, I am true, and I'm not trying to do like to my demise sometimes, but I'm trying to always do what's in the best interest of the client, um, and so it's important that we're talking to clients, we're
So
asking for referrals.
how many hours a day would you say that you're actually on the phone versus on like your computer?
Not as many as I should be, but 2 to 3 hours a day, like,
Okay.
is on average.
So I think that's kind of like a good like a good metric for people to take away. And this is something that I think this is like a huge thing going on in our business. And I think in a lot of businesses right now, from an advertising and business generation standpoint, I think we have, there's so many people that are getting lured into like the flyers, to the emails, to social media, and doing that passive, like passive marketing. And it's good to hear, like, if you're on the phone for 2 to 3 hours a day, you know, that's like, that to me is not passive marketing. Like 2 to 3 hours of actually on the phone, trust building, conversational type of stuff. I think that's really valuable. And I think that for a lot of loan officers, you know, if you're looking for something to take away from like a measuring stick of like, okay, well, you know, what did you say you closed? You closed 5 of those deals with First Citizens last month, or however many it was, right? So, you know, it's like, if you're like, how do I get over the hump, or maybe how do we add some more production into our deal? Maybe we just kind of level set in terms of how many hours a day are you actually having, you know, production minded conversations with people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think everyone's got their superpowers, but like, I don't send out a lot of flyers, to be honest. Like, that's not my gig. Like, I'm not just blasting, like, because quite frankly, I think I hate getting spam stuff. Like, I'm picking up the phone, I'm calling them, and if they're receptive, I'm sending it to them individually. I'm not just like blasting these out. Like, I get calls from a bunch of my realtors all the time, like, oh yeah, you know, Jason Barlow, hey, sending me all this stuff about this program. I just literally had somebody call me about it.
Which is great marketing.
Yes.
So we're doing it.
Yeah. So yeah, they are receiving it. So it's like, but they're like, oh yeah, isn't this the same thing that, you know, that you have? I'm like, yep. So, but if you're not having that conversation, someone else is, you know, and so I think you got to be picking up the phone. People are hungry, and they're all going after the same pool.
Yeah, Jason said happy to help. Are there any? So we've talked a lot about realtors, right? Are there any other, you know, like referral groups that you also get a decent amount of business from? Are there things outside of that that you're focusing on now?
Yeah, and one last thing I'll leave on the realtor side is when you're in escrow, like you have a huge opportunity to have a captive, person that you can pick up the phone and they're going to answer, when you call. So take advantage of that. Like I'd say call at least 2 to 3 times a week, if not like at least twice minimum. Send them text message, and just send video text. That's a huge opportunity. But to answer your question, I've got divorce attorneys that I work with, financial advisors. I think you gotta dip into everything, but divorce is going to be huge. I think in the coming
Yeah.
months, as I think we're heading into a recession. And anytime, I mean, you look at the credit card debt, that is going to cause a lot of strain on relationships. And so that is.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So, but think about it. It's like that's going to be a huge opportunity. And so, bone up on those guidelines. Like, know like what are ways that you can help with a divorce, and kind of have an idea of what you can do to support those people.
Do you have any is like when you're reaching out to a family law attorney? I mean, how are you getting those contacts, right? Like in terms of like, is that through like there's just a sphere of influence? Or are you asking realtor? Like how are you actually working your way down to that family law contact?
Yeah, and so part of it is like I'm part of a group called Vesta, and so that is focused primarily on divorce. And so they have these different hubs that give out free webinars, and you can do this yourself, right? So you can go out there and call a real estate or a divorce attorney and say, hey, look, here's what I want to do. Like I want to do a monthly webinar that just is out there providing free education to the market. And so these are kind of some of the conversations that I'm having, and just picking up the phone. And a lot of times, like I want to be introduced to somebody, like, hey, one of my clients might have gone through divorce. So I'm like, oh, who's your attorney? Did you like it? And getting that warm info is always way better than just a cold call. And just, anytime you got a client that has a divorce, you got the divorce decree, you're like, all right, who's your attorney? Do you mind if I call them? And, just
nice. Yeah, that's a good call.
So that's a great way to do it.
Well, I got to the divorce stats came out in Orange County. I think they've tapped. There's now a 7 in front of it, so over 70% of all marriages are not making it. So
number one in the nation.
Yeah, you have there. If you're doing loans in Orange County, family law attorneys are a very good referral source.
But that's also a good referral source for your realtors as well. So right, so this is why it's good to talk to your realtors and be like, hey, who do you know in your sphere of influence that's divorce attorney? Like, let's have a conversation with them. Like, can you introduce me to them?
Nice. So we're coming up on we're at the 30 minutes. It goes by so fast. But is there any in terms of like final things that you'd want to share with the Arbor Nation, man, in terms of like either top tip or trick or anything to go away with? What do you?
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about guidelines. I mean, when I first came over here and just, coming from, retail, there's so much information. So it's like, if you're new here, like pick 5 investors, don't over complicate your life. But just like get good. Like I'd even go as far as to say, just send everything to UWM for, your first 5 deals, just to make your life easy so you can close super fast and see like, hey, like this is how it can be done.
Yeah.
Because pricing does matter, but at the end of the day, like client experience matters more. So I think it's important that anytime there's investor out there that's offering training, like I attend them all. Like I want to learn, and I'm always trying to pick up new tips and trying to figure out ways to be better. And I think that's something that Arbor's unique in that we're always sharing information, and so you guys did a great job of putting that the right people together in one spot, and I think that's amazing, which is awesome. Why I love it here.
Well, I'm going to give a quick plug. One, I just wanted to thank you so much, dude, for spending the time with us today. There's two things that I'm just going to take since I've got the everybody here watching. So one is I want to make sure, hopefully you saw that email about the trip out to UWM that we're taking in October. I'm going to be heading out there. The more people we can get, it's just going to be solely for Arbor. So we'll have a killer time. So if you can go, they're paying for the airfare, they're paying for the hotel. So cost should not be a excuse. So the more people we get out there, the better it's going to be for our reputation with them and kind of strengthen that relationship. And then also just make sure you keep checking your emails for me as well. We've got a couple really amazing products that are going to be rolling out soon. You saw the most recent one with Figure and with Tommy talking about debt consolidation. For me personally, as I look out the landscape and what's happening here in the mortgage market and where I'm going to be focusing, and I think a lot of our originators need to focus, the cash out and the debt consolidation issue that's going to be starting to take hold in the country towards the end of this year. That's really going to be the story, in my opinion, before we get down to the next rate cycle. So if you're looking, I would get ahead of the curve right now and really start having conversations about credit card debt. Do some homework, like start digging into the metrics about following what's happening with household debt, what's happening with household savings, because you can talk about those things to your financial advisors, talk about those things with CPAs, talk about at your networking groups, because as you start, becoming the expert on like what's happening in terms of like a personal debt crisis out there, that's on, that's on the horizon, you then can position yourself as the person for the solution, right? Because when you're doing equity lines and fixed rate seconds in the 9-10% range, it's significantly lower than the 25 to 30% range on their credit card. So again, it's not all about the realtors. Definitely focus on that business, but get your debt consolidation cash out ears up, because that's going to be a huge market for us. So UWM, cash out, and thank you all for being on the podcast. Thanks, Tommy.
Yep.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
See y'all.